Working on today is a Lincoln MKX. It's a 2009 model. Alright, so what we're doing is I'm changing out the strut and the strut mount. And what the complaint was is that it was making a bump rattle sound while you're driving down the road. So I drove it around. I noticed the same problem, so I took it all apart, and what I found is that this strut mount thing, the bushing in the middle, this thing here was displaced. Okay, when it was all together, it was in a different position than this, and so it's the rubber that holds it together has failed, and it's allowing this center section to pop up and down. I don't know if you can see the place there where it's kind of moved a little bit, moving up and down. So anyway, it's hard to see. It's no big a deal. The other problem that usually happens with these is this thing here. It has like a little bearing in there, and when you turn the wheel, it glides on that bearing. Now I'm gliding the bearing now, and it's doing a pretty good job. It doesn't have any noise or anything, so there's really nothing wrong with that. The strut itself, in this particular car, this strut is fried. I can push it in. Look at that. Just push it in with my hand. Just pull it out. It's harder to pull out than it is to push in. But anyway, it's fried, and I think it's even bent, because when I was taking it off, it was crooked. Everything was a little crooked. So that's junk, trash, leaking. Okay, so I got a new one with O'Reilly. Oh, sorry, I'm falling over. O'Reilly, not a new one, which it's a Monroe. Everybody hates Monroe, but anyway, it's a Monroe 72889, and this is what they had in stock. So I needed to get it fixed today. So ordered strut mount. They had that in stock. Here it is. Here, it looks like kind of a universal setup. It comes with this bushing that goes on the end, because the threads are a little different on the end. So it comes with this bushing. Comes with a new nut. That's it. I'm going to reuse my original pad on there. Going to reuse that. I'm going to reuse the original bellows. It's fine, and the spring is fine. Okay, so let's look at the next problem. The bolts on this mount, this strut mount, these are the stock ones. This is the Ford ones. Okay, they're not very long. Okay, they're probably 1.25 inches long or so. And it's difficult to take the two back ones out. In this vehicle's case here, let's see, this faces outwards like that. These are the two back ones, faces out. This one was loose. This one did not have a bolt in it. And I would figure that we could have a noise and a problem with this bolt being gone. It's very hard to put that in. You have to start this bolt here and this one here in the back with the threads just barely poking through the hole, and I'll show it in a minute. You have to start the bolt on there first, the nut on the bolt, with it just barely poking through the hole, okay, first, and then tighten it up slowly and pull this thing up into the mount where it mounts onto the body. The reason why is because there's something right here up under the hood that's in the way. You can't get to it, so it's a difficult deal. That's why this one was missing. Somebody messed around with it, they put it together and forgot it, and it was too much trouble. So let's have a look under the hood with the new one. Alright, so this is the new one, and I just stuck it in there without the strut, everything together, and these are about almost 2 inches long compared to the old ones. Okay, and I marked it with a Sharpie, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut quite a bit of it off, because the ones in the back go up so high that they're actually touching on something back there, and there's no space for any wrenches or any tools or anything. So I'm going to cut those off a little shorter, and that'll make things a little easier to do. What the other situation here is that I'm doing this without taking this panel off the top and the windshield wipers and all that garbage. I do have a box in 12mm dog leg or dog bone wrench that I can use with my torque wrench and putting these on. These don't torque down to very much, probably 35 or 40, I'm going to use Loctite, and I'll probably use the original nuts. The original nuts have a real nice flange on it, and that flange does the right job for spreading out that load on the metal. Okay, the nuts that came with it are tiny. Okay, whoops, I'll get it with a magnet. The nuts that came with it are tiny, and goodness, nice and slick right here, and they don't have hardly any flange on them to spread out that load like you want. So get it back up here and put it in a place that's not cockeyed. So as you can see the difference in those two, that's why I'm going to reuse the originals. The originals are nylon locking, the ones that came with it are not. I am going to use Loctite anyway, so even though you're not supposed to reuse these from the manufacturer, because they say once you go through that nylon locking and take it on and off like that, the nylon gets messed up and it doesn't do as good of a job. So I'll put Loctite, it'll be fine. The main reason I'm using these is because of this nice wide flange face on there that spreads the load out pretty. That's what I want. As you can see, there's places in the body there where it has hit, where that flange has dug into it a little bit. And then these smaller ones are just going to have a less of an area to spread out on and not as good of a bite. So I'm going to fix that. Let's look at some other things. So this is what it looks like. That's what it looks like. I just got it set in there. Anytime you do anything like this, you always have to hang your brake caliper, okay? Don't let it hang on the hose, it'll mess the hose up. I can't say that enough times. It's gonna get repeated over and over and over again. But on this particular situation, this CV boot is leaking. I'm gonna replace the CV axle, that's what the guy wanted. And I'm just showing this for the sake of showing it. I'm not showing all this going back together and what size tools and all that business. I'm not going to mess around with all that because that stuff is simple. If you're into it this far, you can figure it out. I did remove the ABS sensor. It's a good idea to take that out. You don't want to damage it. I am going to pull this CV axle. These type of hubs on here have the replaceable bearing, I think. Yeah, these are not. Yeah. So it has a press fit bearing in there, and so the torque of this nut is important. It has something to do with the way it's packed. I don't know what the torque is. I'm just going to look it up online or call the dealer. I don't know what that is yet, so I can figure that out. It's not too hard to do. I'll see about putting that in the notes. Now, one of the other things that you want to look at that I am going to be checking before I go about all that together is I'm going to take this bolt off here, this nut off for this bolt for this sway bar. Okay, I'm going to get this thing loose and I'm going to check it to make sure that it's not clicking or clacking, because this right here is a very, very good place for it to make that kind of noise. Now this one here has the boots are intact and everything looks good. Normally you can tell when the boots are gone and you see rust coming out of it and it's all fried, well, that's a good chance that it's toasted. These look pretty good. I'm going to still take it apart and check it just to make sure. And as well, when I get this CV axle, I'll be able to check this up. You can feel the hub by just turning it, but with it connected to the CV axle, it's difficult to tell if that bearing inside that hub is fried. So when I get that tore down, when I get the CV axle out, I'm going to have a time of discovery and make a decision on that bearing. If that bearing needs to be replaced, it's the type that you have to press it apart, press it back together type thing. And I don't even know if I'll mess with that. If the bearing is not toasted, then I won't even do it. But anyway, so that's kind of how this looks. Let me get this bolts cut off and get this thing going in a better direction, and I'll get back with you. Alright, so this nut came out with a 36 millimeter. It's a big one. 36 millimeter impact, took that off there. That came out pretty easily. It looks like it does have a little water intrusion here. The splines look pretty good. But, you know, obviously the boot's leaking and all this grease came out. And so I'm going to pop this guy off. Let's feel the bearing now. That bearing feels fine. There's no rumbly, okay? If you did this bearing and moved it a little bit like this and you felt a little resistance in there, a little rumble, just a tiny little rumble, it's bad. But this bearing feels good. It doesn't have any lateral play in it, and I don't see any huge problems. Of course, obviously, it looks like some water got in there. but it doesn't have a seal on this side, so that's pretty normal. The threads look good, the splines look pretty good. But yep, that's what we got. We don't need a hub bearing. That's good. I don't mind doing it. It's a whole lot more work, but as far as this axle is concerned, let me get this thing popped out and get the other one in, and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so I've got this CV axle popped loose, and I just got a pry bar, popped it loose from the bottom, and I've got a dripper, something to pick up the drips right there. You want to keep track of how much is coming out. Now I've got it jacked up a lot on the driver's side at a high angle, and only maybe just a few cc's came out, not much. If you do this flat, you probably get a whole lot. I'd rather have just a very little, just so I can just touch the dipstick, feel it just a tiny little bit. But anyway, what I wanted to do here is show this end of this new CV axle. I put some trans gel on there to hold that clip. If that clip, if you try to put it in there and the clip is hanging straight down, it'll catch. So it's a good idea to put trans gel on there, and also a good idea to compare apples for apples. Whenever you get that old axle out, to have a look, make sure you got the right one. People make mistakes. It would suck really bad to put the new one in there, not be the right one. You have to take it out, and it's an install part. Some places frown on that. So compare it before you slap it in there. I think that's about all I'm going to do on this video, because basically from here it's all downhill. I'm just going to put it all back together with the new strut assembly. I might take a few other shots here or there, but this is the majority of it. Alright, so what I did is I marked with a Sharpie on one of these, and that gives me about that much thread, and I've got a thread chaser on there. Okay, so I'm going to cut it off, get my threads the right length, put that sucker together and call it good. Got one of them cut off there, and I was going to show it next to the stock one what the difference is, which isn't much. Okay, just got a couple of threads shorter than the stock one, and that's fine for me. Those two back ones are really tight area, so that's kind of how I'm going to do it. You see, this is the way they are now. I'll put a original one on there. Okay, this is how they come before I cut them off. Really long. So I'm cutting them off. I've got my Hilti, my Win. I bought this Win off of Amazon, super cheap. Seems like it works good. Now I haven't grinded with it for hours at a time yet, but just for the little stuff that I do around here, it works pretty good. And it's just about the cheapest one you can get. Anyway, I'm going to whack these other ones off. The ones in the back, you see this faces towards the wheel, so this is the back two. These are the ones I'm going to put the shortest, and then these here I'll take a little bit off, but not a whole lot, because these are the ones I'm going to want to get the nut started on first and have the most thread, because they're out front, they're easy to get to. Let me get these other ones whacked. Alright, so that's it with all of these. I've got them all cut. Even though they may not be all the same length, I don't really care about that. I just wanted the two in the back to be shorter, and I wanted this one to be shortest. This one's a little taller, and these two are obviously going to be taller than the ones in the back, but these are the ones that are hardest to get to. I wanted them to be the shortest. So that's kind of what it looks like. I got them all done. I put a thread chaser on it before I cut it, and blended the threads with just a hand grinder, and it looks pretty good. It's going to work just fine. Alright, so I got this strut all put together. The joust bumper is in there. Okay, that's what that is. That's the joust, okay? And so when it gets to a certain point, that sucker actually takes an impact. I don't know how much. Now this one's in okay condition. I'm not going to replace it, but you want to make sure and check that when you get it apart. And then get this spring and put it on there. It fits into the notch here. Okay, it fits into the notch right here. Alright, and this is the outward position where that's facing out. That's outward. Okay, and on the top here you got this little bushing because the threads are different. And we got our new bolt. Okay, and then of course we got the mount that goes on top, and it has an arrow on it, and we're going to want to put that on there with the arrow facing out. and then you'll have to rotate that little gimbal bearing or whatever they call that thing. You'll have to rotate that a little bit so it fits in. I'm not able to do it with one hand, I don't think, but it fits in pretty good, just like that. So that's close enough for right now. Yeah, there we go. So that's how it all fits on there. Now the instructions say don't use an impact, or well, don't over tighten it. I'm going to pop this thing on with an impact and just hold it with my hand. Most of the time they'll zip up. I'll check it with a torque wrench and see what we got, but I don't know what the torque is. I'll have to look that up and write that down on the video later. Real quick on the AutoZone thing, they have a pretty easy way to check it. The wheel 72 to 78 foot-pounds. The axle hub nut 174 to 231 foot-pounds. The strut shaft nut, which is the last thing I just did, 43 to 58. And the upper mount nuts, the bore nuts that go through the top on the strut mount, are 29 to 40. So pretty easy deal. I hope this helps somebody out. So that's what it looks like. Those two back ones, you can see that I've cut them shorter. And I did use a ratcheting box-in wrench to tighten those up with. It wasn't that big of a deal all the way in. If you look at this piece back here, it's just plastic. So if your wrench gets stuck below it, you can just push it back with a screwdriver or something. I just didn't want to take this top piece off. If it's easier for you to take the top piece off and get to it, that's fine. I just didn't want to mess with all these little push pins and all that business and the windshield wipers. There's too many things in this car that are breaking, and I'd rather just avoid that. So, but that's what it looks like. I hope this helps somebody with my ideas and a different way of doing it. Now on this end here, we're ready to go back together, and it's just hanging here. Now what I've done, and I recommend for anybody to do anything around a CV boot, is to cover it up with something so you don't ding it, especially a brand new one. That's going to make you mad. I've done it before, it's not fun. So this is what I do to keep it from getting a little ding in it. You can use this or some cardboard. Just some kind of towel or rag. I've just got like a fender cover type thing. But that's how it looks, and it's looking good. It's coming back together. Well, that's kind of what it looks like, all put together there. I have a few things to tidy up. This bolt was missing, and don't forget your ABS sensor. I need to put that little guy in and tighten up my tie rod in, but I'm going to turn the wheel a little bit to do that. But anyway, I hope this helps somebody, and just a little different ideas and methods and things. So y'all have a good day. Bye.